So many people here. Thank you again for joining us. So I'm just going to start with some introductions. My name is Paige Davis, and I'm the president of AdventureWomen. And again, we're just so pleased to see so many of you here tonight and so many of you interested in this topic. As you probably know, if you're familiar with AdventureWomen, we consider ourselves to be more than just a travel company. We are a relationship company. And when we speak about relationships, we're not just speaking about the relationships our guests have with each other or the relationships our guests have with us, but also the relationships you build with the people you meet around the world, the business owners, the artists, and the guides. So before we begin, and as people are still entering, we're just going to do a little bit of housekeeping. Again, for those of you who are just joining us, I do have your cameras and your microphones turned off. This is just to help reduce distraction, but we really want to hear from you. So you will see the chat feature that's at the top of your screen, and we invite you to post your questions throughout this webinar. This is going to be a 1-hour webinar. We're going to leave the last 15 to 20 minutes for your questions. So at any point during this conversation, feel free to type your questions into chat, and we will definitely try to get to as many as we can before we log off in an hour. So let me introduce you to the women with me tonight. Tonight, I'm joined by my AdventureWomen colleague, Jennifer Jeffrey. And Jennifer brings a lifelong interest and deep appreciation for cultural diversity. She believes cultural exchange is an invaluable form of education and that the most meaningful experiences are the product of authentic human connection. Jennifer identifies as a lifelong learner, seeking to continually learn and grow, and she's delighted for the opportunity to participate in this conversation on a topic near and dear to her heart. Thank you, Jennifer, for joining us. And I'm also joined by Dawn Booker, who is a fearless traveler and the founder of Packlight Global Itineraries, an experiential travel company for women of color. So Dawn and I met over email a few months ago and discovered we had a similar belief in the power of travel in the lives of women. Now, Dawn has leveraged more than 25 years of marketing, strategic communications, and event planning experience and applied lessons learned while exploring the world to create and curate travel experiences that cater to Black women. Dawn is a journalism professor at Bennett College for Women, and she teaches strategic communications in the Global Communications MA department at the American University of Paris. Dawn is interested in elevating travel narratives from women of color. She's on the editorial board of Journey Woman magazine, and she was tapped to serve as the launching editor-in-chief of the digital travel journal Detour, Best Stories in Black Travel. Jennifer and Dawn, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I can't wait for you to get started on this conversation that I know is going to be fascinating. So now I'm going to pass this over to Jennifer, who's going to get our conversation started.
Thank you so much. It is an absolute pleasure to be here with you tonight, especially to welcome Dawn with us. And yeah, I think to get started, I would love to just ask you, Dawn, a little bit about what brought you into the travel world, about your company, Packlight, what your sort of vision was in creating that company. Oh, and you're muted. Just
There we go.
Hey,
Jennifer, nice. I'm so excited to be here chatting with you today. So, I actually came into this space kind of in a backward kind of way, or backdoor kind of a way. I am midway in my career. I moved to Paris to pursue in my mid to late 40s, moved to Paris to pursue a master's in global communications after working in marketing, and always having a love for travel, always understanding that that was a part of who I am. It was a part of our family structure that we traveled on vacation every year. And also it was kind of the love language with my daughter and I is that we traveled. And so I always knew that, and I had been to Paris for an extended period of time previously. But once I moved there and number one, had an opportunity to explore other parts of Europe and South Africa, and just to really travel and have this amazing experience. When I came home, I thought I was going to go back to my marketing career, but what ended up happening is, once I started my job, I could not, I was still traveling. I was speaking at conferences about culture, about imagery in representation, in tourism, and topics similar to that. And so at some point, I said, you know what? I'm going to go see how I can align these two loves, travel and culture and representation, as well as marketing and serving communities that I believe are viable communities. And so I started Pack-A-Lite a little bit. I think I worked in that job when I came home for about 2 years, stepped away and started Pack-A-Lite. And when I started Pack-A-Lite, my vision was really to create a space of joy and freedom for women of color. Very often when I would travel, well, first of all, the travel industry was not marketing to women over 40 for sure, and not to women of color specifically. And so as I looked at the landscape and wanted to travel more, knew I had friends that had empty nests, that, had kind of realized, okay, my husband just might not ever go on this trip with me, and women that just wanted to also not be in a space where they had to plan everything, where they could just show up. And so when I started Pack-A-Lite, it was really out of a love for the women that I considered friends and colleagues that I know had the means, had the time, and had the bucket list that they wanted to attack. And so I started Pack-A-Lite out of that. And really, the way that I knew that Pack-A-Lite was more than just kind of a travel business was evident to me by the way that the women who travel with me have responded to these trips and come back over and over again. So I feel like I'm providing a service that really makes women feel good about choosing to do something that is just for them.
Mm, I love that. That's a beautiful origin story. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, you
Well, actually, I want to start. I love it. It says travel fearless and Pack-A-Lite. I like the ideas in that. What does Pack-A-Lite mean to you? What is
so
is there a story behind that?
the story is kind of interesting. There's a long and short version. I'll tell the shorter version. I was at a wedding or a wedding reception, and we were asked to write advice to the bride and groom who wanted to travel. And I wrote on the map, Pack-A-Lite. And this was after I had resigned my job, wasn't sure what I was going to do next. And when I wrote it, there was something about what that meant to me. Now, it's not about your luggage. It's about baggage. It's about the things that keep us from really enjoying our trip. It's about the things that keep us, the encumbrances that keep us from exploring the world. And really, if you're familiar with the Erykah Badu song, Pack-A-Lite, or the song is actually entitled Bag Lady, but in that song, she talks about, all the things, the baggage, the things that we carry. And the older we get, the more that hampers us or hinders us from being able to live full lives, especially as women. We've taken care of everyone. And so, even though I'm finally getting at a better place, I'm not a good packer, I'm not a light packer, I'm not a carry-on packer, but I'm better than I used to be. And I always tell the women who sign up to travel with me, they ask me, does that mean I have to travel with a carry-on? The answer is no. However, if you think about the idea of packing light, or the idea of what you bring, you have to manage. And so that is literally and figuratively. And so it does serve us to pack lighter and to believe and understand that we are enough. And sometimes the last 10 things we throw in a bag, we usually don't need, or the things that, we think might make an experience better when really just showing up and being open. And so I'll share a little bit more about what I mean by pack light, but really the foundation of that is that what you bring, you have to manage. And we invite you to bring as little as possible so that you can just have an amazing trip.
I love that. I really love that. Because when I first saw Packlight, I thought, oh, that's not me. I'm not
It's
a
not me
carry-on
either.
packer either. But hearing that like layered description and the understanding of what the baggage piece means, like that's such a beautiful idea. And I love that. And I think it really connects to what we're going to talk about in terms of culture and what we bring when we travel to um, outside of the world that we're currently used to operating in.
Absolutely.
Um, are there some values that sort of guide the trips um, that you operate?
Yes, I have a few stated and unstated values. And so and I have learned over time, so I started in 2018, and so I've learned over time that it is important for me to continuously state what our values are. And so they are harmony, equity, peace, and cultural competence. And really, I don't state sustainability or the way that we revere local and indigenous people. When I talk about the equity piece, I'm really, when you sign, we have typically have a couple meetings before the before the actual trip, and we also introduce ourselves. And I typically ask that women not share kind of their backstory, so not share what they do for a living, not share the 7 kids, 25 grandkids, all of that, because for in many spaces, when you introduce yourself that way, it immediately creates a little bit of a hierarchy. And as women, as a society, really, we're continually comparing ourselves. And so I really want to create a space where everybody has paid the same. Everybody's on vacation. Your identity at home has little value in this community. Unless you're a doctor and somebody gets sick, then we might we might need you. But we've had a minister travel with us that nobody knew. We had the first Black woman to head the American Medical Association travel with us, and nobody knew. We've had teachers, we've had nurses, all sorts of. I know because a lot of times the people that travel with us come from different parts of my life, or when I first meet them, they may tell me what they do. But I like for these women to just, you're not networking, unless you do it on your time, but we really just want you to have fun. And so I've actually realized that it's important for me. So now in each meeting, I've kind of committed to making sure that I communicate those values again and again.
I love that. And I think another piece of that too, in that leaving sort of who you are, your identity behind, it really allows people to be very present in the experience that they're having and immersed in the experience that they're having, which again, when speaking of sort of cultural experiences and cultural immersion, you're able to really absorb and experience things in a more rich way to be fully
Absolutely.
present. I
Absolutely.
love that.
Yeah. And I like the way you tied them together. That's absolutely true. I agree.
Yeah, and so kind of moving into the talk on culture, I guess, and this sounds like a very basic question, but I think it actually there are a lot of levels to it. What do when we say culture, what does that mean to you? What do we mean by the word culture?
So I think that it's really about sort of the tangible and the intangible systems in a space or in a place. So it could be the cultural norms or the norms, the practices, values, the ways of living, could be anything from food to languages to religion, family structure. So it really is, I consider it for like an umbrella definition. It's just the ways of living and being in a place, and it's beyond. So often we think culture is just what you can see, And so we recognize culture when we can see sort of a huge difference between maybe the way we look or the way we dress or some of the big things, but culture is the big things, but it's also the little things, the intangible things that make um, even our families, have cultures. Our neighborhoods have a culture. If you think about what is American culture, it's different in New York than it is in California. It's different in North Carolina than it is in Texas. And so it's really about those intangible things or ways of living that kind of make us who we are.
Yeah, absolutely. I was trying to think about how I would define it when I was thinking about this talk, and I kept coming back to the idea of the many different ways to be human, like the many different ways to express our humanness there's similarities, but then there's just differences. Like you said, that kind of just, and there's so many different ways.
And it's
Um,
multi-level, and it's multi-dimensional. So it's not just one thing. It's you really,
Absolutely.
and it's visible and invisible. So, it's just so many things. And so it's an amazing way to experience travel is to be considering culture.
Absolutely. And so what are some ways that tourists would interact with culture during a trip?
So, not just on a pack light trip, but really on any trip, there are so many like cool ways that you can experience culture as you travel. And some of them are through kind of the typical touristy type tours. Um, so my favorite are food tours. I have actually been recently doing more food tours than city tours. We were recently in Singapore with a group, and our tour guide took us to, it was a food tour. He took us to the Arab or Muslim part of town. He took us to the Indian part of town and the Malaysian part of town. Three different parts of town. We were able to understand the historical history of that part of town. He took us to places where everyday people eat and shop and create. So we had this experience, and our guide was from Singapore. And so he is a second generation Singaporean. So we were really able to understand a place through food tours. I also think that when you're looking for recommendations, when you're doing research, to spend some of your energy on getting that information from locals, from local, my favorite thing to do is the taxi driver that brings me in. I ask him his favorite restaurant. I ask him where it is, if I need to shop, where's the best place to shop? I always ask the taxi driver. It's just, for me, it's something that allows me to immediately kind of get the real, because the hotel might tell you, places that they have relationships with. Your tour guide may do the same. But my favorite tapas space in Barcelona is because I asked the taxi cab driver, where's your favorite tapas? And every time I send someone there, they're like, these are the best tapas ever. And then also kind of looking at other ways of culture, I think traveling slowly, um, and recognizing these things, noticing differences, noticing the way things are done here as opposed to the way they're done at home, but not in a way that you're comparing. Very often, especially because I'm taking groups, and usually the groups, it's their first time in that country or that part of the world. And I think that's typical of most group travel, is that you have a bunch of folks that are going to a space for the first time. And so their point of reference is the US or wherever they may be from. But I think noticing the differences and then appreciating what you see that is different, and assigning some of the research that you've done, maybe about their history or about a colonial history or about, the history of migration, whatever has made this place that place, really noticing difference. I know that we're so often told, The way to get to know people is look for similarities, look for similarities. But then that means that you are measuring someone by your own yardstick or by the way that you see things. But when you see the differences, you have an opportunity to appreciate them. I also think, something as simple as learning phrases, and I've, when I moved to Paris, I had 6 good French words. And the longer I was there, the more I could speak French, the more I could understand, the more I understood that if you want someone to treat you well in pretty much any country, if you can say hello, good night, goodbye, good morning, thank you. For me, how much is one of mine that I need to know. But if you can say these things, if you can say yes and no, very simple, without pulling out your phone and, showing somebody your translator and all of that. And I will share the best tapas place in Barcelona. That came on my screen. I definitely will do that. But yeah, so those types of just small things. And when you do that, sometimes the person in that country is wanting to learn English. And so you have this lovely exchange that you do not have when you step into an establishment and say, hey, I'm looking for, and you're using, colloquialisms and words that even if someone spoke English, they wouldn't necessarily know. And you're not giving them an opportunity to engage with you in a way that, number one, allows them to try out some of their English, and then secondly, respects the fact that we are traveling into another place. And I think another way is engaging in two-way kind of equitable conversations. And this is when you encounter all different cultures. Sometimes when I'm traveling, I meet people that are from other parts of the US or other parts of the world, and they start conversations with me, but very often those conversations aren't equitable conversations. They're kind of rapid fires, because they're curious or they're curious about, my ease in a place or the group that I have with me or, why I say, okay, this is my 3rd time in Paris this year. There's this kind of inquisitive curiosity that we all have, but you actually are able to exchange when you not only ask 6 questions, but when you answer 8. And so you're not just, because different countries, different cultures, the amount of information, the ease with which information is shared, the types of information that is shared, it is not the same. And so just understanding a little bit about that and, engaging in media that is locally produced. I always watch the news even in another language, just to try to kind of see what's happening. My daughter and I have kind of figured out how to change the captions. In most global TVs, we can change the captions to English. And so we'll be watching the news or watching something and we can see, what's actually going on. And so there's a lot of ways, but it's really about traveling slowly, traveling mindfully, taking a minute, being patient. And then, I kind of have a general rule about culture and the way that I experience culture when I travel. And I try to stay away from experiences that require the host country to perform their identity for me. And so if I go to an Asian country or an African country or even a Latin American country, and, as Americans, we have these ideas of the costumes and the dress and the expected presentation of a local person. And so we seek out ways that kind of validate our expectation. And really that is taking away from the cultural significance of some of these dances, these costumes, these experiences, because they're being done to entertain and they're not contextually rooted in the experience. And so we very often avoid And now we did get, we went on a full day tour in Bali, and the folks traveling with me were like, I thought we didn't do this, Dawn, and we don't, but it was a full day tour. We didn't know we were going to end up in this space. But when I work with destination management companies, I try to be very clear that I'm not interested in that. We're not. But if we can, go to someone's house and do a cooking class, which we have done multiple times, if we can use services like Eat With, which allow you to participate in a dinner party with a local family. All of these are ways that you can learn about this local culture, have the opportunity to engage with it, but in a way that feels so much more relaxed for both. And it doesn't put the burden of a performance on somebody when you're literally visiting their house. So it's like, if you come visit me and then I have to entertain you the whole time, and so really I'd rather get to know you by just sitting down and talking to you, or having a glass of wine, or some coffee. I try to I always try to get to where I'm going a little bit early, and I may meet someone on the staff that I can talk to. I'll find a coffee shop, or somewhere close to the hotel that I go to the same place, and so can have a little bit of dialogue there. But there are just many ways that you can, like I said, it's about being slower in your approach to travel, not packing your entire itinerary with tourist experiences. And if you take a tourist experience, seek out, tours by locals, or local ways in which you can experience, and then you can ask some of those questions. Every time I travel and have one of these local tour guides, I learn something that I absolutely never knew. And so it's really a great way to do that. And I like private things. I think when you're in large groups, sometimes you're so far from the host, or it's difficult to have those kind of conversations. And so those are some of the things that I encourage and that I do when it comes to meaningful cultural exchange.
Yeah, I love that. I think the more opportunity there is to connect person to person with another individual, that's the most enriching way, in my experience, to really understand a culture, because it's experiential. You're really able to interact, and even communication style is a piece of culture. So you get to learn that as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I love that. So I think there's a lot of benefits to the culture, and I think there's, again, a lot of similarities, I think, between Adventure Women and Packlight.
Yes.
And we definitely, like, I know I was on an Adventure Women trip to India, and it was one of my favorite experiences, was getting to go into a family's home, and the mother and the daughter cooked dinner with us, showed us as they were cooking what they were using for spices, and not just for flavor, but also for medicine. This is an anti-inflammatory, and we're putting this in here. And so you're learning about so many different things, and then having those conversations. And I think a lot of our guests really seek out those experiences too, those connections with others. Are there risks to cultural exchange and tourism?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so some of the benefits, I think, are, you get to understand a place kind of beyond the one story. So, the French people are this, or the Brazilian people are that, or, in Asia, they're this way or that way. But when you have these sort of layered experiences, you're able to understand culture in the way that it's intended, which again is multi-level, multi-dimensional. I think some of the risks are, around appropriation, around, losing a certain level of agency, and what I mean by agency is sort of creating this inequitable balance of. So when we did a cooking class in a woman's home in Ghana, but she owned the company, and she in the front of her house, she had the store that sold all the toilet paper, paper towels, soap powder, all of that for everyone in that part of the village. And her house, her kitchen was her stove was the like Viking. Her house was beautiful. She had put all her kids through college, and she owned this cooking experience. And so when we went to her house, there was this I told her I felt like I was sitting at my grandmother's house, or my mom loves to cook. So it was this experience where she wasn't, again, performing for me or creating this experience for me. She had a business. We paid her, and economically we supported her. So it wasn't kind of, when I wrote the paper and presented it in South Africa about commodification of culture, one of the things that we talked about is that in some countries, India, South Africa, they have slum tours, and or what they call slum tours, or township tours. And those tours actually typically don't provide that type of an experience, because they're not run by someone local. They're run by a larger company. And, very often the people who participate on those tours are not giving context for the people, or why they live that way, or what historical situations have led to that. And so it creates this unequal experience. And so I love the fact that you all not only were able to learn how to cook, but to have this experience of getting to know this woman and talking to her. Whereas some of those tours, you literally just walk through someone's house, and it's not, obviously that's not an exchange, or it's not a fair exchange, clearly. So
Yeah, exactly. I think we're kind of touching on these things, but I know the term sustainable traveler is something that you use. So how would you describe what it means to be a sustainable traveler, or what that term means to you?
So I kind of juxtapose it against sustainable tourism. And so sustainable tourism is sort of industry wide. It's a regenerative, intentional way in which a company or an entity in the tourism industry has decided to think about their environmental impacts. A sustainable tourist, however, is someone who makes the same types of decisions, but for themselves and the way that they show up in the world. And so they've decided that, maybe instead of having a volunteerism experience, that they're going to commit that they're going to eat as many meals as possible in a locally run and operated restaurant. Or that when you go to a market, you're not going to haggle so far down that, the person that you're purchasing from does not feel respected. It's a sustainable tourist thinks about what is okay and what is acceptable at home, because of an important part of sustainability and a part of the development goals, not millennium, what are they? The sustainable development goals by the UN. One of the most important aspects is the impact on the people. And so when I think about the sustainable traveler, I think about the impact on the people, and how, the people that live there, the host, how they're impacted by your time there. So, I really tell people very often, it's the way that you're traveling sustainably, or one of the ways is you think about, how would this work at home? If you're, how does this impact the local people? Have we made decisions while we're traveling that support and respect not only their culture and material culture, but also their values? I had a family that I recently put together a trip to Italy, and it was two families. And during the trip, they wanted to I had set up this wine tour that they were going to be going into people's houses, small wineries. The one, because I've done the tour, and one of the wineries they were going to, like, it was a like three generations that were still working there, and so the grandmother makes like this sausage by hand. All these things happen on this tour, and the day before, they were like, we want to go to Pompeii. And I'm like, wait. And then they proceeded to kind of share that they wanted their money back. And it was this long exchange and, this really intense. And so when I explained to them that, you're going like outside of Rome, you're going to the Arpina, wine country. It's a luxury experience, but it's also artisanal. He's going to introduce you to parts of culture. And when I explained that to them, it was very clear to them that, wait, this isn't the typical wine tour. This isn't the typical way, of a tourist experience. And so when I told him, I want to make sure that when I send people into Rome or to Amalfi Coast, or places where you actually can get beyond what you see on Instagram or what is a typical tourism experience. Not only are those experiences that are custom and personal, they also are worth every dime. And so, you have to be clear when you're traveling that, one of the things that you're doing is you are visiting, and the tourism industry is supported by your time, your experience, and a lot of their um, uh, kind of historical ways of living and artistry are being extended and supported by tourism. That doesn't mean it's this entirely transactional relationship. And so, again, as a sustainable traveler, it's really important that you're thinking about the people as much as you're thinking about your carbon footprint, and you're thinking about, whether or not you're using a water bottle or a plastic disposable. It really is about the way you're honoring the spaces. And as we know, there's a lot of pushback happening in the world right now about over tourism and about the ways in which tourists from around the world, it's not just, from any particular part of the world, but from how tourists from around the world are not understanding the heritage and the culture and the connection to history that some of these spaces, some of this art represents. And so there's a disconnect. And so a sustainable traveler respects that and understands that and travels in a way that honors that. And so I think that to me is just as important as choosing um, a, a a property or a destination attraction or excursion that is maybe a B Corp or that is very committed to sustainable practices. So I just think it extends beyond the carbon footprint.
Absolutely. I think that's very important, the impact on humans that we're having when we're traveling. And I think part of it, I know you mentioned a little bit before, the idea of doing a little bit of research before traveling, I think is really essential to fulfilling that role respectfully.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And in terms of the phrase culturally competent, because I think that's another goal that we seek, is that sort of a similar definition? Or
So for cultural competence is really just a willingness. I mean, it's very it's simple, but it can be made to feel complex. But someone who moves in a culturally competent way is someone who acknowledges difference, understands that. They are not colorblind. They're not, they actually understand that we all bring preconceived notions. We all bring sort of the experiences of our lives and of our home country with us. But to be competent is to seek ways to overcome those barriers and to overcome the things that keep us from being able to have meaningful relationships and meaningful experiences when we travel. And so a culturally competent traveler is someone who has done the research. It's someone who is open to being wrong about some of the things that they've heard or learned or been told about what it means to be uh, a French person or to live in an African country or to be Asian, but to really allow yourself to lean into what you can learn. And so the idea of competence is the idea that we're always learning. I love the fact that you identify yourself as a lifelong learner, because that's what it is. I mean, you're never going to be culturally competent. You will always be striving to be more culturally competent. And I make mistakes. I still make mistakes. I still, have had to kind of check myself and say, wait, was that kind of a privileged way that I interacted, or is my expectation connected to what's more culturally normal for an American, or, somebody who has a similar background to me, or is that connected, to the culture that I'm visiting? And so a culturally competent person in a travel context is really someone who is always kind of interrogating how they show up in a space and how they could have a more meaningful experience by trying to be more knowledgeable and more understanding about the culture that they are visiting or are participating with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely agree and identify, as I said, as a lifelong learner about other cultures, but also it's always an experience of learning about myself and recognizing where my discomfort shows up when I'm in a different cultural setting, where my recognizing my privileges and my biases and those pieces. So it's learning about oneself and the culture you're in, and that's one of I think the most beautiful things about travel. It's that's why it's truly enriching experience.
Beautiful. That's beautifully
Yeah.
said. Thank you, Kiefer.
Oh, thank you. And so I know we've covered a lot of components of interaction with the cultures we go to and practices. Do you have sort of some like practical takeaways, maybe like 5 takeaways from this talk that you?
I think some of them I've said, but I'll kind of reiterate a little bit. And so, I think that, again, there's no, the intent of this talk was never to kind of make folks kind of feel bad about the way they show up. Again, I'm always learning more about myself, always realizing that, I kind of, I saw this Adam Sandler skit that, I don't know if you've seen it, but it said, if you're unhappy at home, you're going to be unhappy in Italy. If you're fun at home, you're going to be fun in Italy. And it's kind of like this tour, it was a Saturday Night Live skit, but it was done sort of from a tourism company. He was supposed to be, and so it's kind of like everything's not going to change. And so you really want to start thinking about before you travel. I encourage people to journal, to think about, okay, what are my expectations? How can I, make space for me to just be in this space, or to do something that allows for these meaningful connections. And so really be intentional. And then always ask yourself, would this be okay at home? From a cultural perspective. I have often seen, sometimes we see something interesting and we immediately want to take a photo. But when you take photos of people, of children, would that be okay at home? to randomly take a photo of someone that you don't know. And so, or just other types of things that we might take for granted. So, and then again, if we go back to, what's behind me, my trademarked tagline is to travel fearless and to pack light. And so to travel fearless is really to travel informed and knowledgeable and to understand where you're going and why you're going and how you can make your experience more meaningful to you and to your family or friends or whomever you're traveling with. The first question I ask people when I do my concierge travel is, how do you want to feel on vacation? It's the first question I ask. And so when I create their travel experience, it's a narrative. It's a narrative that, is going to create spaces for them to feel that way, as opposed to, you're going to Paris, you're going to hit all the spots. You're going to do things. If you're there for romance, then I'm going to create a romantic story. And so really, again, it's about um, traveling fearless and without anxiety really has to do with being prepared, knowing why you're going, informed and free of stereotypes. And that's the pack light part of it. The pack light part of it is kind of leaving your encumbrances, the things that may have made you not be clear about why this is a good place to travel, or what you can learn from a place, kind of leaving all that at home and then just allowing the trip to unfold. And again, the journal, I can't say that enough. I've had the same, my first travel journal I received in 2003 when I went to Paris for the first time. And when I go back and look at the things that I noticed and the things that I wrote, when I wrote it in 2003, I said, when my daughter's in college, I'm going to move back to Paris. And in 2013, I did just that. And so my travel journal for me reminds me of how I felt. It reminds me of, like, to have the same, I just finished this journal, so I had it for 20 years. Because I only use it on significant trips, or on trip, when I travel, and I use it in a way that, I really write how I'm feeling, what I've learned, and kind of have a formula for what is really beautiful. Oh, I see my friend Cheryl that went to Tanzania with us. Sorry, that's the ADD. But I was like, oh, bird. So, but yeah, one of the ones, my friends that went to Tanzania with us. But, just really writing. And I usually put a journal in the bags, because I know people are having like these experiences that they want to keep in that moment. Like, you don't want to get home and try to remember how it felt, the first time you saw the Mediterranean. Like, you don't want to get home and try to, when we were in Peru, we were on these floating islands or floating cities or communities in Lake Titicaca. And you don't want to get all the way home and try to remember what it felt like to interact with those people. And so a journal, a digital or old school. And again, just stay present, stay mindful, be patient, breathe. Things go well, things go really bad. It might rain your whole vacation. You have to be able to use this time and this experience for what it was meant to be, which is to experience something different from home. And so sometimes that's easier to do, sometimes that's much more difficult to do. But when you allow yourself to do that, very often you get this travel experience that aligns with what you initially wanted to do. And so that's why I think, journaling before you go, while you're on the trip, and then when you get home, really allows you to understand what you've learned and what you've received from this experience.
I love that. I love that. Thank you, John. That was that's a great I love the idea that you've had a journal for 20 years and can go back in time in that way. That's such a gift.
It is.
Um,
It is. It is.
yeah, that's wonderful. I think just keeping an eye on time, I'm going to just check over into the chat and see if we have any questions from the audience. Um, let's see. So I see one question, and this is something I think we do encounter with that was somewhat often. Um, what are your thoughts on members of the group who are not willing to try the cuisine of the country? Not referring to food allergies or religious obligations, but just
Um, I think that we have to be like, I'm always cognizant of allowing people to be. When I first started Pack Light, I spent a lot of energy kind of creating and curating and making a space kind of fit what I saw that Pack Light should be. And what I've learned from the people that travel with me, what I've learned, my daughter's always kind of by my side on most of these trips, reminding me, just let people be. And so I've actually learned to let people be. So, if you gave me something with cilantro in it, like,
same.
that's how I told my daughter. We had the conversation, how would you know if I was replaced by my evil twin? And and she said, if they ate cilantro, like, oh, my daughter just wrote, your daughter sounds awesome. But but yeah, so it literally, I just let people be. Like, that you should be able to say no thank you. Like, that's a part of your experience. And so, I think I encourage people to try something new, and every trip I have, people that try something that they've never thought they would do. We did hot air balloons in Egypt, and all of us that chose to do it, we were all afraid of heights, including me, and we all did it. And so, people have done zip lining, people have ridden camels, people have tried all sorts of food. But I think a way of culturally um, respecting the people on your trip with you, because I know you and I and Paige talked a little bit about kind of the people that travel on my groups. There's culture there too. We're not all one homogeneous culture, and so there may be reasons why this person is not going to try something. And so that is a part of respecting culture, is to actually allow people to say no thank you. Like, I think it's a part of it, really.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a balance of stepping outside of your comfort zone, but also respecting our own sort of needs. Um, we have a question. Do you find that guests eventually connect well without sharing their personal stories up front on a trip?
Yes, they do. And it forces them to do it in a way that feels comfortable to them. Like, very often I will know people's backstories. I will know, and I hold them very close to me. I will know who these people are, or if, because I deal with women primarily, even over 50, I will know if they're grieving a recent loss. I will know certain things that, again, sometimes that feels really uncomfortable for people to kind of be put in that space. And so, yeah, I think it's important that, you know, I make sure that there are times on buses that, at dinner, we kind of mix it up. We sit with different people. I try to make spaces for that. But 99% of the time, um, people figure it out. And the question that I saw, do guests stay in touch with each other? Yes, we create a WhatsApp group before. And that WhatsApp group, my WhatsApp groups, usually people continue to communicate in those groups for about 6 months to a year after we get back. And so because we do small group travel, a large group, well, we did 2 large trips, but most of our trips are between around 16 at the high number and around 10 or 8 at the low number. And the folks stay in touch. We definitely stay in touch, and people share at the level that they're comfortable sharing. I think that's important.
Yeah, I love that. It's also, I think, kind of a cultural phenomenon of the US that people define each other or ourselves by what we do for work. And that's not necessarily the case in all cultures. So I kind of like leaving that cultural piece behind and just experiencing
We're
people's.
all on vacation.
Yeah,
I'm just on vacation, just like you. So
exactly. I know I don't want to forget, we have a question about the best tapas in Barcelona.
wait, okay. So I just shared that yesterday. So it's at the very top of my email. So if you give me a second, I will put it in the
Put that
I
in
will
the
put it in the
chat.
chat.
Perfect. Any other last minute questions? I know the time has flown by and this conversation has been wonderful. I'll just look at some comments. Somebody commented that sometimes other Americans kind of grill with a lot of questions, so that's something to be mindful of.
That
I'm
is
sure.
that is who typically does that. Is
Yes.
other Americans.
Yes, we're very
So,
curious and
okay,
excited.
let's see where my chat. Oh, here it is. Okay. There's a little background. I just took everything that I placed in the email that I sent to one of the women that's traveling to Portugal with us in a few weeks. But so this is the tapas restaurant. It's Cuidad Candol, and you can't make reservations, but it's worth the wait. It was phenomenal. So
Fabulous. Thank you.
you're welcome.
And I'll just echo one other comment that I do think is important that now I've just lost. We had a comment just really echoing the importance of researching before a trip, that it enriches the traveler and it honors the culture, which I agree. And one note, sometimes it's important too, I've found in some of my travels, to research areas that are not good to talk about with people. There are certain things that are not sort of culturally acceptable to talk about. So that's something I like to kind of keep an eye on as well. Just so
That's
as
really
an
good.
American who gets very curious and asks a lot of questions, you don't want to ask a question that actually can unintentionally be.
And also
Yeah.
like tipping, understanding the tipping culture.
Mhm.
Just doing a little research on the tipping culture and making sure that you're prepared um, with currency, not just credit or debit cards, but actual local currency. Um, yeah, things like that.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Well, we are almost out of time. This has been such a fabulous conversation. And I love going at it from this sort of exciting perspective. Like, we're on vacation when we travel, we're excited, we're having fun, and we're learning about ourselves and each other and the world around us. Any final thoughts, Dawn?
No, I just want to, reiterate what I said in the beginning. When I received the email from Paige, who shares my sister's name, it was just such a lovely invitation for us to just communicate and connect. And I think that just the spirit in which I was invited to this conversation and the just the lovely way that, I've been received, I'm just very grateful. And it's been just a good opportunity for me to even think again as I'm getting ready to travel. So I just wanted to say thank you. I want to thank you and everyone that you invited here today, for making space for just kind of meaningful cultural experiences. And again, it's really just thinking about it. There's no kind of hard and fast, you got to do this, don't ever do that. Really just being mindful, just thinking about how what we're doing may impact the hosts, because they are our hosts. They're not service, they're not the person at the front desk, they are our host.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think I speak on behalf of not only myself and all of the AdventureWomen team, but our travelers who are here in the chat as well. Thank you so much for what you've brought to us. I'm so excited that we've, that Paige and you connected in this way that allowed this to happen, because I think this is a really beautiful and important conversation. I'm grateful to be a part of it, and I'm just really grateful for all you've shared, which is really important and insightful. And I think we have a lot in common in the ways that we approach
Absolutely.
travel, which I think is
Absolutely.
wonderful.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you everybody who joined us tonight. And yeah, I guess we'll wrap it up on that. Thank you everybody so much.